that men need to just step up. And that makes up for years, even a decade plus of bad behavior is so false. So when I go to the store, I'm in the electronics section, and I remember when I was younger, I used to go to thrift stores to hunt for good deals, and it seems like now, anytime I'm at a store with groceries, I'm hunting to see which place has the best deal on ground beef and produce. But nonetheless, I get to the electronics section, and there is a man and woman there who I would assume are, or rather were, boyfriend and girlfriend. And I all of a sudden hear, while I'm in the middle of trying to find this external hard drive, I hear the guy say, "Who was that on your phone?" Now she's trying to deny it and act like nothing happened. Then he persists to ask again. And they eventually end up leaving the store. She's trying to throw a fit, walks out of there with her phone in one hand and then the other hand holding a bag, almost kind of like this. I think you guys know the kind of gesture I'm talking about, the entitlement on full display. Almost like a waiter bringing a plate over to the table. So after they leave the store, I finish doing my shopping. And I'm driving home, not even so much thinking about the interaction I saw, but I'm on the phone with my brother telling him that I found the hard drive that he was in the market for. But during the drive, there was quite a bit of traffic, which I would have thought normally would have been an inconvenience. But there was also a form of peace there. It's not an area I normally drive in. The nature was very nice, a lot of farmland, so it was peaceful. I almost felt the sense of freedom just being in the car by myself. And then I'm thinking about the car ride that this couple would have had on the way home, where it wasn't peaceful. There wasn't freedom. It would have been like me taking my hand off the steering wheel. And instead of there being freedom, there's no direction. There's no direction of why you'd be dating a woman like that in the first place. No direction of it leading anywhere seriously. And I think that is just the thing. So many men look around now, basing off of interactions they've had, family, just everything going on. And they're really seeing little to no prospects for dating and a relationship, rather it leading anywhere seriously. Because when I hear this notion that men need to step up, men need to do better, work on their appearance, work on this, work on that, while also excusing the behavior that I see from modern women on full display really on a daily basis, especially if you go to social media, which you shouldn't be bothering with, and just say you're uninterested if you see that. But when I see this kind of stuff, and I hear this conversation of accountability, of course I think men should improve, but there's a big difference between self-esteem and self-improvement, and really self-obsession, and thinking that the world revolves around you, and thinking that everything is about you. Because I'm all for getting in shape, I'm all for uplifting the people in your circle, but you shouldn't just do things for women. Additionally, when it comes to even building yourself, I shouldn't say I remember like I was around back then, but even looking at older generations, I had talked about in a previous video a woman who asked me to help her grab something that was high on a shelf, and I helped her, and she was very respectful, very polite, and she was probably in her 50s. And even looking at grandparents now, where back then, and looking at, in particular, my mom's side of the family, but my grandmother, who was all for and really tried her best to make sure my grandfather had a peaceful life, and also making sure that the family would have their best route to success. And of course, I understand times were different, but that's besides the point. Not this obsession with the phone. not this obsession with oneself and ego, but also but instead having the interest of the family, because that's really what the prize was. This whole idea, like when I see these videos that I'm sure many of us have seen of women who are talking in their cars most of the time, speaking of direction, but talking in their cars most of the time about how, and they're boastfully announcing that they're at peace and happy, which is not something, by the way, people at peace and are happy normally do. But doing that and then saying things along the line of they do want to get married and have kids, but treating it almost like it's a bucket list. Like it's something they now want to do because they're at an age where they're seeing that they're only getting older.
And sure.
Or it's something their friends have already done. So they're really wanting to do it for the wrong reasons. The prize, and then all while saying they're the prize. The prize shouldn't just be the individual. It shouldn't just be the ego. It shouldn't just be about your own sense of thinking that you are above everything. It should be about the family. It should be about peace. It should be about the best interest, if this applies, for the kids. That's what it should be about. And when I see this obsession with the phone, obsession with ego, I'll put up front and saying this. Anyone who acts that way couldn't even hold a candle to grandparents now in previous generations who actually had the best interest of family. And of course, not everything was perfect back then. You still had divorce, but things were not nearly like they are now. And it wasn't such commonplace like we see on social media, like we see with all of the behavior. And even I've heard this too, because a lot of men will, rightfully so, have a problem with a woman who has been with a lot of men in the past, who has, dabbled with clubs and a lot of that kind of lifestyle. And I've heard some people try to say, oh, well, you should look over it. Everyone has a past, which of course I don't agree. You should just look over things like that and have no standards. But I had a family member, and this is just for kind of comparison here, but I had a family member who helped someone get a job, who had issues and stuff going on, but nonetheless, many years ago, helped them get a job, and it was even a life-changing opportunity. And then, sadly, they fell into the same habits in the past, and even put this family member's reputation on the line, getting fired from their work, losing the job, having really no appreciation. And really what it comes down to, in general, I suppose, when it comes to help, if someone doesn't want to help themselves and make the change, there's very little to really nothing you can do. But when it comes to this behavior that I see with the social media stuff, with the nightclubs, with the raves, with the going from guy to guy here and there, and then before you know it, you've been with so many different guys. No self-respecting man is going to look at that and think that's a green flag or think that they should date a woman that way. To even say something along the lines of, well, you should overlook those things, really telling men to not have standards. Trying to act like it's just the times, just because the majority of people are doing it. I mean, I've even seen things as ridiculous as a woman who's in a relationship giving a different guy her Instagram, for example, and then acting like the guy should look over that with, oh, well, she was just trying to be nice. That doesn't mean she's going to message him. Absolutely ridiculous. It's very sad to say this, but I think a lot of people in relationships now, even, if they really saw what was in their girlfriend's phone, it might be something that could warrant a breakup. I say this within a way it's terrible, what these smartphones and social media have done. Now, I remember back when I was, I would say in my late teens, because social media was around even in the early 2000s, but it was, for the most part, adults were using it. And I say that also because the atmosphere on there was more mature. It wasn't about all of the nonsense. It was about, okay, I'm only sharing things with very close friends and family. I'm not trying to just get and derive as much attention and validation as possible. But I saw that shift around when I was in my late teens and how different things are now. And all of these really just such obscene things that have been going on for the past 5, 10, 15 years, which is really giving men little to no incentive to want to date, if that, just having very good discernment, as they quite frankly should. But when it comes to things like, I'll put it this way, let's say if a guy, okay, they say level up, they say step up, whatever it might be. Another thing I've heard too is men being afraid to talk to women. I don't think that's the case. Now, that might apply in some instances, but of course, there are ways that someone can work on that, right? But what men, I think, are really opposed to is when they hear about things like divorce. Now, I'll say this much. I've known a lot of men who have dealt with custody battles, divorce. I was having a conversation with someone earlier today about someone that we know who is in the process of dealing with a custody battle. And this guy I was talking to had actually gone through it himself 10 plus years ago. And was saying how there could be a family, a kid, a woman could even decide she's unhappy. And now there's a custody battle. They're seemingly, in most cases, the mother gets full custody or majority custody. And now the father is out of money, thousands upon thousands of dollars on fees and such, which is so messed up. But this is why I mentioned grandparents in previous generations, because even though you did have that, there was care for the structure. It wasn't just about you. It wasn't just about really the selfishness that is on display nowadays, where really, if you are someone who cared, you wouldn't put your kid through that, unless it was, of course, an extreme circumstance. I'm not denying that. I think anyone watching this would agree with that, right? Now, you could take a guy talking about this, whatever, step up, do better, physical. Fine, take a guy. Take a guy who's 6'3" and in shape, whatever you want to have it. And now, you could even throw in some of the surface level stuff on there. Let's say he has a big social media following. Does that mean that he's going to find a woman worth dating? Now, he might get more attention from women, but does that mean he's going to find a woman worth dating or taking seriously? That's really the conversation that should be had. Not about approaching women and this and that, because you used to see a lot of that now. But I think a lot of men are seeing the behavior and thinking to themselves, yeah, of course we can do all the things and improving. And like I've mentioned, I think it's good to uplift the people in your circle. I think it's a good thing to go and take fitness seriously. I think that's a good thing. But you shouldn't just do it for women. And it shouldn't just excuse the bad behavior. Now, most men that I've talked to, and I think a lot, they're mostly doing, not only are they not doing anything wrong, but they're doing things that they should be doing, right? A lot of the time they are not spending their 20s going to clubs and wasting it here and there. They are finding ways to build themselves and uplift the people around them. That's what I see a lot of the time. This whole conversation about women saying where the good men are at, when I see a lot of that, I would imagine when they were perhaps at maybe 20, 23, 24, those good men probably wanted to take them out on dates, but they thought they were boring. They thought they weren't exciting enough. So now, saying something like that, there's plenty of good men. I talk to them on a daily basis. Good, decent people that want to uplift everyone else around them. Now, in terms of this conversation, are there things that perhaps men can do better? Of course. And I think that really doesn't even pertain to dating. I think that, there's issues among friendships, among, coworkers. There's a lot of different topics in itself, a plethora of different things. But when it pertains to this dating thing, the blame shift, I think, is absolutely wrong. So, just my thoughts, guys. As always, I appreciate you for taking the time to view the video. And it's just, when I see this kind of stuff, especially seeing the shift throughout my life, I absolutely think that there is something else at play rather than just blaming men. I think that there's clearly a lack of accountability. So, again, guys, I appreciate you for viewing. Hope you guys have a good one. Something that was crossing my mind recently is how we're expected to be providers, be the paycheck, be the protector, whatever you want to call it. Be this traditionally masculine kind of 1950s boyfriend. But the second you try to have women be more accountable, you want them to be loyal, you want them to be respectful, you want them to be feminine, traditionally feminine, you're told that you're controlling. You're told that you're manipulative, along with a bunch of other buzzwords, whatever you want to call it. And it's a one-way street. We're expected to maintain ourselves a certain way, where women just seem to have the freedom to do whatever they want to do. With this kind of high-value woman stuff, thinking that the only thing they need to provide into the relationship is being a female. That's not at all how it works. If you're not going to have respect in the relationship, it is never going to work. And if you guys are in a relationship like that or dating a girl like that, you got to show her the door. Because that's going to be a complete waste of your time. Even I think about a lot of the stuff I hear about women's past, which, I understand that everyone's done things in the past that perhaps they're not proud of, but understand something. Men shouldn't have to step up if a woman had a phase where they were sleeping around or whatever you want to call it. Because stepping up shouldn't be a way to accept your actions. People have to naturally face consequences for their actions. And I understand that our past doesn't define us. I get that. I, as anyone else, have done things in the past and made mistakes that they're not proud of. But if a girl's 30-something years old and slept around her whole life and had all these good men trying to ask her out in her 20s, reject them because she wanted to go with the toxic guy, or she just wanted to be, she was thinking she was too good for him, which I'm going to get into that as well. It doesn't make sense for a man to step up. It doesn't make sense at all, especially if you're someone who has been respectable. You had focus. You worked hard. You built something for yourself. You shouldn't have to step up for a person like that. And what I think is such a big problem now, why a lot of women are not dating or anything like that, why they're being so rude and dismissive towards men, is because I remember back when I was younger, right? In high school, you had a few men who, for the most part, got either most of the girls or all the girls, the popular girls, whatever you want to call it. Where sure, women have always looked towards marrying up, whatever you want to say. But understand something. Back then, they were looking at the best guy in their neighborhood or in their town or in their city, in their high school, in their college. Nowadays, every single woman has a smartphone. They all have the whole world at their fingertips. Now they're comparing themselves, or they're comparing men with not just men in their town or neighborhood. Now it's literally every man on the planet. We're talking millions and billions of people out there. To where now most average women think that they're entitled to some 1% man, wanting to strive towards that. Average, decent men, which the worst part is most of these guys probably go to the gym, take care of themselves, probably have careers they built, are doing all the right things in life, but they're seen as invisible. They're seen as non-existent. And I think something, again, that's important to understand when women see this stuff on social media, whether it's the height, the looks, the physique, because, everyone's going to show themselves in the limelight, the yachts and that kind of stuff. Understand, a lot of that stuff is rented, it's fake, it's filtered, it's not real life. It's not real life at all. Like, you have people on social media literally having multiple accounts with multiple different personalities, don't have any personality in person. They'll post 10 to 20 different things a day on there, real stories, whatever. Yet they're doing nothing productive during the day. It's fake. That's what it is. It's pretentious. And you have women looking at a filtered, unrealistic standard now, a lot of the time, to base on dating. And it's super destructive. Of course, dynamics are never going to work that way because it's not even a real person. It's not even a real thing. That's what it is. It's not even real life on there. I remember when I was growing up, yes, we had MySpace, yes, we had Facebook. But I was in high school around the time that I got out of high school was when Instagram and Snapchat started becoming a thing, becoming popular. And, you didn't have people looking at the pictures and comparing and stuff like that. People were just, it wasn't perfect. Things have never been perfect. But it wasn't nearly as toxic as it is now. Not even close. And what's so crazy to me is you have a lot of women now who are on dating apps getting bombarded with DMs and attention, to where a lot of the time they don't look at men as relational anymore. They look at them as transactional. They look at men as something that they can seek validation from for their own ego, for their own egocentric purposes. And unfortunately, you have a lot of men that are still DMing these girls nonstop, that are still giving them the false validations. Relationships are a joke nowadays. If you want to speed things up, you're being needy. If you want to be clear and concise with your intentions, you're being needy, or you're speeding up, whatever you want to call it. If you text too frequently or respond too fast, you're desperate. It's absolutely insane. These games that you're expected to play, that's not a normal thing. And even women testing men like that, why would you want someone who's constantly going to test you and challenge you 24/7? That's not feminine behavior. Nothing feminine about it. And it's us as men need to understand that if we have someone there that is trying to steer and pull and push buttons and this and that, guys, that's manipulation. That's manipulative. For you to text someone and see how often they're going to text me back, what time they text me back, and then basing your interaction with them off that is manipulation. That is egocentric. Because you're thinking, oh, he texted me back, so I must be above him. He texted me back within less than 10 minutes, so I must be above him. He must be desperate. That's not living in reality. That's really just games, and again, it's manipulation. And I think, too, a lot of people need to understand this. Because it's pretty crazy how some people try to act like men are the issue when in reality men are not wanting anything really to do with this because they see it as it's almost like a rigged casino game where the house has the advantage and the house is always winning. Men are walking away from relationships like no time I've seen. Never in my life have I seen so many men be just completely disinterested. No interest in approaching women. No interest in dating and relationships. And people need to understand that men don't want to play these kind of games. They don't. And understand something. If you're a man right now and you're single, especially if you don't have a bunch of distractions, social life, stuff like that, you have this amazing opportunity to lock in. This amazing opportunity to achieve your goals, to work towards something, because a lot of the time those things are a distraction. Girlfriends in many cases are a distraction, especially in today's climate. Social lives are a distraction, complete distraction. People wanting to hang out, girls again wanting to go on dates, all this kind of stuff, pulling you away from things you should be doing. Men should always focus on their purpose. If you're going to have people around you who are going to derail you from your purpose, you need to distance yourself from them. Doesn't matter if it's a relationship, doesn't matter what it is. Because that's where you start to lose the self-respect. That's where you see a lot of guys get caught up in chasing women because they don't have mission and purpose in life. They don't. And, I think a big issue too is that a lot of men who are doing all the right things, which is many men that I've seen, quite frankly, most men that I talk to and interact with, who are doing all the right things that they should in a relationship. Like I said, take care of themselves, going to the gym, working on their careers, working on themselves. A woman should want to be supportive of that. I even had a friend of mine where he was dating a girl and he wanted to become an actor. And he had mentioned to the girl the idea of him going into acting. And she was casting down on it, saying, I don't think you'd ever do that. I don't think you'd ever commit to that, this and that. So if this girl's not supporting your mission and purpose, she's going to derail you from that. She wants control of your life. A real woman in a relationship should want to see that man succeed. They shouldn't only want to be with them when they've already made it. They should want to be with them along the way. Especially if they see someone who is working towards something that's going to lead to success down the line. Again, the whole concept of delayed gratification, I don't think many women or people understand anymore. Rome wasn't built in a day. These things take time. But they see the social media lifestyle. They see the yachts. They see all that, which a lot of the time is rented. They see the cars, again, a lot of the time is rented. And they want it now. Like, how could a woman not see a man like that, thinking he's going to go into acting, potentially even do very well in acting? You'd think she would be supportive. But everyone now, women just want things handed to them. Because like I mentioned with the hypergamy stuff, they're no longer comparing themselves, or I shouldn't say comparing themselves, I'm competing towards whatever you want to call it, striving to get the best man in the town, the best man in the neighborhood, or in the high school or in the college. It's really the best man on the planet, the social media stuff. And again, the thing too is I hear people say, level up, level up, level up. Understand, I'm all for living yourself to the best of your ability, being the best version of yourself. But my point being is that average men should not have a hard time getting average women. Understand that. These women are not Victoria's Secret models that you see with this mentality. And either way, you should not base your existence off female attention. You shouldn't just want to level up just to attract women. That's even why I disagree with a lot of people who, which I think the gym is paramount. It's necessary. But a lot of men who go to the gym saying that they're there just for women, just for women, just for women. That to me is a form of chasing. In some weird fashion, to me is a form of chasing. Because you're basing your daily routine around women. I would say, like, Going to the gym should be about feeling your best, should be about looking your best, and should be about being presentable, fitting clothes right, being healthy, number one, being strong, number two, because God forbid anything happen. You want to be physically able. That's why I go to the gym. I never really understood that, where men just said, I want to get women, want to get women. But besides the point, this isn't a tangent about the gym per se. But just to point out that I see a lot of guys still falling for this kind of stuff. And it's like crazy how social media has blown out of proportion the expectations and just this kind of unrealistic standard where average women look at average men and think that they're invisible, think that they're below them. And it's so crazy to me where, the top 1% of men would have been for the top whatever percent of women. Now I'm seeing a lot of average women who are not settling. There is really hardly any commitment in relationships. This 1 foot in, 1 foot out, kind of half this way, half that way, is what I see a lot of time nowadays. It really is. Having a guy on the side they're talking to, I'm talking to this guy. It's insane to me. A lot of women getting caught on dating apps. Unfortunately, to say this, not just to be realistic, I think a lot of men who are in relationships, if they saw the stuff that was on their girl's phone, it would probably be enough to warrant a breakup, whether it's things in their social media DMs, whether it's them having dating apps on the phone, which I've even heard gaslights of saying, I use it to make friends. I've heard stuff like that before, of women trying to say, because I think in some apps they have a friend section where you can meet people just to socialize with, whatever you want to call it. But I've heard of gaslighting tactics like this. And when men hear this, they're not going to want anything to do with it. And even with a lot of the passport bro stuff, because I used to not really understand that, right? And this was a number of years ago when I didn't. But I think a lot of reason people do the passport bro stuff is because they're worried about potential legal ramifications and societal ramifications, consequences of dating nowadays. Because I even was talking to someone, and there's some website, I can't remember what it's called, but you can essentially expose someone. He cheated, he did this, he did that, how they are on a dating app. And this dude found out that this girl, who he only went on a date with once, I think it didn't go, whatever it might be, was just slandering him, making all these kind of defamatory, defamation kind of statements. It's absolutely insane. That's why I think the passport bro thing was popular. Perhaps it still is. Why a lot of men are going to other countries, because they see the kind of westernized mindset that a lot of women now have in America, and they're wanting to seek options elsewhere. They're going overseas. They're seeing if they can find, again, like I mentioned, more traditional kind of feminine women for relationships, for dating, whatever you want to call it. Because I don't see how we could be so broken like this and people really not understand that. I mean, I haven't traveled in a while, but even when I used to go visit Greece when I was younger, the way women interacted, the way women were, was a lot more feminine. Even when I used to date when I was younger, I dated a few girls who were au pairs, which, if you guys aren't familiar with that, essentially like foreign exchange students. I think I dated one from Brazil. I hung out with one from Italy, but again, many of Peru, like all over the world, these girls will come from parts of Asia and stuff. And you see them acting much more feminine. Even when I was in university, a lot of the foreign exchange students, the women, they acted more feminine. They didn't grow up with this kind of indoctrination. And I'm not saying that they're, bound to be perfect. I'm not saying that at all. But I understand why that's a thing. I understand why a lot of people say get out of the country now. Now, I grew up in the city my whole life. I've heard some people say rural, kind of more urban areas are a lot nicer. I like to think that's the case. I hope so. But either way, guys, no matter which way you want to put it, there's no reason to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But dating nowadays is just broken. It's just toxic. I mean, that is what it is. But anyway, guys, appreciate you viewing the video. Hope you guys stay tuned for the next one. Thank you. So I was at the gym not that long ago, and I was on the cardio equipment. I overlooked an interaction between a man and a woman who I would assume are in a relationship or married. They were probably in their late 20s, younger couple. And the dude was asking the girl who was on the treadmill how much longer she had, when she's going to be out of the gym. And she just dismissively kind of shooed him away like a fly, rolled her eyes at him, made a rude kind of facial expression, shutting him down. And he just walked away with his head down. He walked away and head down, shoulders shrugged forward. And then when she finally was done and ready to leave, he was sitting there like waiting on the bench, waiting for her. I saw them walking out of the gym, and the girl was in front of him, chest pumped, chin up, and he was walking behind her like 10 feet away with his head down and his shoulders down. And I got to thinking this, not only are men losing their focus on their mission and purpose when getting in relationships, but men are losing their masculinity. I see a lot of men who are losing focus on what it means to be a man. They're playing these kind of toxic games. And it's so bad to the point where I even remember there were some friends of mine when I was younger, out of high school, who were literally saying that their goal in life was to be a stay-at-home father, was to have the woman be the provider, was to be the submissive one in the relationship. They were saying that's totally normal, like that's acceptable. No understanding of male leadership, no understanding of masculine frame, no understanding of relationship dynamics, no understanding of how to be a man. And it's like, why would you want to be in a relationship versus, which again, this thing people seem to misunderstand. Being single and being alone is not the same as being lonely. Those are two completely different things. But my point being is, why would you want to be in a relationship and play these kind of court jester games, make a fool of yourself, versus being single and not being desperate, perhaps waiting to see if you can get lucky enough to find a good woman? And I remember I used to see all these videos come out the woodwork like 5 to 10 years ago. I used to see all these videos of men, talking about, I'm 30 years old and I've never had a girlfriend. They were like ashamed of it, 25-year-old virgin, whatever, never kissed a girl, whatever kind of stuff you want to see. And guys, if you notice lately, you don't see those videos coming out of the woodwork as much as they used to, because I think people are starting to realize just how toxic the dating market really is. They're starting to realize they're not missing out. The grass is not greener. And again, talking about the whole loneliness thing, people seem to not understand. They think getting in a relationship is going to fix their problems. If you're in a relationship with a toxic woman, they are going to isolate you from your friends, from your good friends, and from your family. People that you should have in your life. And once that relationship ends, which eventually it will end, and it'll probably end in an ugly way the longer it goes on, then they'll realize what real loneliness is. Then they'll realize that they didn't have any self-respect. They'll develop a disdain towards people. People seem to not understand that. Being alone, being single, and being lonely are not the same thing. And to people saying, because I see this a lot too, is people talking about how women just want chads, women just want these top tier, top echelon guys, whatever it might be. Understand something. It's not just the average men who feel this way or are dealing with this kind of stuff in the dating market. I had a friend of mine, and I've had friends of mine put up with this kind of stuff, but I had a friend of mine in particular who was 6'4", went to the gym, and was on his way to finish law school. So again, top tier guy, and he was 23 years old at the time. And he was dating this girl who just disrespected him, disrespected the relationship. And you think, this is a guy who's 6'4", this is a guy who's getting everything figured out, going to be able to support a family, going to be financially independent. And she thought she could do better. I mean, you even see it, even many celebrities I've seen. Tom Brady's wife, you see plenty of celebrities that have the looks, have the status, have the money, and they're still dealing with these kind of toxic relationships in the dating market. This whole grass is greener mentality. And I've even seen women get with guys. It's not even just guys that are better in terms of the looks, whatever you want to call it. And again, that's why I don't agree with a lot of this kind of Chad stuff that's pushed. Because I've seen women get with guys that are lesser in the looks department, lesser in the morality department, financial department, whatever you want to call it, just because it's convenient at the time, just because it serves them a purpose. You know, so again, guys, it's bad enough a lot of men lose focus on their mission and purpose with relationships. What's even worse is men losing their masculinity. And I don't think it's that men lose it in the relationship. I think these are men that probably didn't even have much of an understanding of masculinity to begin with. Because I've seen this too, where a lot of women wanting to get with men that they can control, wanting to get with men that are easy to kind of manipulate, you know, not men that have self-respect. And again, I've even had women that agree with me on this, that are against this kind of stuff. And they've literally said straight up, like, women that are like this in a relationship, they're going to end up, number one, miserable down the line. They're going to end up lonely down the line, most likely. They're going to be bitter. Because I've seen that time and time again. Like, even growing up, I had friends of mine who grew up in single-parent households with a mother. And a lot of those women raising their sons to dislike their fathers, to really just hate masculinity in general. Again, that's why you see that kind of behavior. Combine that with the schools of a lot of the overwhelming teachers being women, who are also promoting this kind of stuff. But I've seen these women just get to the point where they're 60 and they're just miserable. Then they want to pass that trauma onto their sons. And then whenever, or if their son wants to make some kind of connection with their father, they're totally against it. Because they were controlling to begin with. That's quite frankly, I think, why a lot of the times the father leaves, because they can't handle the toxicity. And they want to start passing that toxicity onto another man, because these are women who, quite frankly, a lot of them hate men. I'll be up front. There's a lot of women right now who hate men because they would not run a relationship in this way if they didn't. And the issue is now, because I was in this position when I was, late teens, 20, 21, foolishly, but again, being young and naive at the time, I thought getting a girlfriend would fix all my problems. You have people that think getting money will fix their problems, getting a nice car will fix their problems, getting a job promotion will fix ours, when in reality, these are just masking the problem. There are some things where you have to really deal with. There are things you have to face on your own. And some battles are harder than others. But my point being is that I thought having a girlfriend would fix my problems. And it didn't. Not only did it not fix my problems, but it only led to more problems. It only led to things being worse. It only led to more insecurity. It only led to more emptiness. And again, guys, when people get desperate, where's the first place they go for women, right? Dating apps, nightclubs, raves, bars, all where it's the easiest to get an interaction with them. But understand something. Those are not women you should be taking seriously. It's like extremely, I would say 99.99 women who are on dating apps, who are in nightclubs, who are in bars, are not worth taking seriously. Not at all worth taking seriously. And again, I know men who are very good with conversation, communication skills, which again, those are things that men can work on. They do the look max stuff, which again, things that men can work on, which we're going to touch on that. But even them, they're not taking these women seriously, which I don't agree with this, but they're just there really for flings or hookups. They're not taking them seriously because they see how a lot of these men have been in relationships before that ended ugly. They're seeing how out of control the dynamics are right now. They're seeing how there's no understanding for what a real healthy relationship even looks like. And it's just crazy. Like, even with the dating apps, they're made against the favor of men. I have a friend of mine who knows someone who works behind the scenes on with one of these big dating apps. And they've literally said straight up, like, it's a business. They don't want people to find relationships. They want the men to pay for these memberships and this kind of stuff. Like, it's made against the favor of men. So a lot of men now, they get on these dating apps, they don't get the matches, they don't get the success they think that they were getting. They get a lot of women who are overweight or quite frankly, to put it blunt, well below their league, whether it's morally or physically. And then they start getting even more desperate and insecure. Then they start settling for women who are toxic, like I mentioned. And it's a whole crazy cycle that spirals out of control. No one should be using dating apps. I have friends that use them, that I've recommended. I've used them in the past, but again, nothing good came out of those. There was not one girl that I met with on a dating app that was worth taking seriously. I mean, that's just the truth, guys. And what bothers me too about this is that even having these kind of dialogues, you get a lot of these buzzwords. You get a lot of the just ways to shut down this kind of conversation to begin with. Things like incel, black pill, misogyny, whatever buzzword is convenient at the time. But understand something. This is not normal. This is not at all normal. Think level up, whatever they want to say. It's like, dude, like I mentioned, even these high value men, that's the scary reality. They're dealing with the same frustrations. And look, I'm someone who agrees that you should be presentable. I'm someone who agrees that you should go to the gym. You should have a clean pair of shoes on. You should have a good haircut. You should be hygienic. But understand something. I don't do that for female attention. Because a lot of men right now are doing that, and they're forgetting really being masculine, and that's why they're being walked all over. I've seen studies with the whole stuff where if men look like they're more put together, they're less likely to be targets for crime and bullying. They're because when you're walking the room, you're more respected. People just subconsciously are gonna take you more seriously if you're put together, generally speaking. That's why I want to be presentable, not for female attention. Because let's also remember this too. Women can use, they'll use the lip fillers, the makeup, the body sculpting clothing, all that kind of stuff. There's nothing wrong with men wanting to improve themselves physically, but understand that's something that women do for male attention. I don't think it's masculine for men to be doing all this crazy stuff for female attention. I just don't think it's masculine. I think I'll put it this way, guys, because again, like I said, I'm all for it. I'm all for looking your best, feeling your best. But if we're not going to talk about mentality, if we're not going to talk about real masculinity and what that means, then quite frankly, to me, it's meaningless. It's just surface level. It's just on the outside. It doesn't mean anything to me. I know so many men now who are insecure, and they want to knock men for choosing not to date, or because even a lot of the chat stuff I see being pushed by men for whatever reason, trying to disqualify men because of their height or whatever it might be. And I'm like, we need to form a brotherhood. I'm not saying you have to be weird and glaze other dudes and stuff like that, even if they're your friend. I'm not saying you have to do that. But I'm saying we should be more uplifting to one another and say straight up. If someone's not having success in the dating market, it's not because they're under 6 foot. It's not because this and that. A lot of the time it's because they have masculine frame, because they're not easy to control and manipulate. Because most of my friends, guys, and I could closely say all of them, but I don't want to, I'm sure there's one or two examples it's not the case, but pretty much every single friend of mine from when I was in high school up until my mid-20s, they were all in controlling, manipulating circumstances where the women walked all over them, where the women disrespected them, ended up cheating on them or doing something else that was dishonest and disrespectful. Not one of them had ever led to marriage. It led to really years of their life wasted. Guys, I know someone who was in a relationship with a girl and they had broken up, and I had no idea about this until recently. But I found out that he was still paying her phone bill 2 years after they broke up. And I think she cheated on him too. And I'm thinking to myself, could you imagine what that relationship was like? I mean, you want to talk about getting walked all over, being submissive. I mean, that is just next level insane to me. But he finally canceled the phone bill, and she starts texting him, talking crazy, talking trash to him. And I'm like, this is insane. There's really some men that are going along with this, that have been that emasculated. because they've been told how bad masculinity is. They've been told, whether it's by a mother who has disdain towards their father about how bad their father was, how bad their behavior was. It's insane. I can't blame men for wanting nothing to do with this. And like I've said before, I'm someone who's all for marriage. I think it's an amazing thing when a man and a woman can come together, bring a child in this world, raise that child. But you can't settle for toxicity. You can't lose your own masculinity just to be walked all over and be a court, and even playing all these games, because even I see it too. The games over text, like all this kind of stuff. If I were to pursue a woman, the next woman, whatever, I'm not wasting my time over text. I'm straight up gonna either call them or talk to them in person. Like these games and stuff that people are playing, man, it's just crazy. And the sooner people stop playing it, the better. I'll put it that way. Anyway, guys, appreciate you viewing. Hope you guys have a good one. So earlier today, I was at the local Buffalo Wild Wings with a couple friends of mine, and they had told me about a buddy of theirs who they've known for a number of years, really since childhood. I think since they were probably 13 or 14 years old. And they're in their late 30s now. But this friend of theirs reconnected with them about 2 years ago, after having not talked to them for 14 years. And of course, that's very bizarre. I mean, this was a childhood kind of teenager best friend of theirs, right? And I guess the reason why was that he had gotten with a woman, gotten married, but then gotten divorced. So he reached out to them after getting divorced, after, having custody battles about his daughter in court and stuff like that. And I was thinking to myself how, number one, there's so many men who get with a woman and just drop all their plans, all their life goals, everything. They stop associating with friends of theirs. They stop connecting with their family. And they essentially let the woman lead the way and take control of their life. And then when it ends, which in many cases from what I've seen it does, the man now comes back to his friends who they haven't talked to for a long time, or family. Meanwhile, they've spent so many years that they should be focusing on their goals, their mission, their purpose, on complete nonsense. And I wanted to tell you guys a story about a friend of mine who he was a childhood best friend, I would say, someone I knew from middle school and high school, who had a similar kind of experience as this friend who hadn't talked to his buddies for 14 years, where he just let the woman take control, take the lead of his life, and wasted years on focusing on his mission and purpose, and the relationship ended ugly. So I had a buddy of mine who had finished his bachelor's degree, was doing everything he should do. I mean, I know not everyone's pro-college, but that's besides the point. You guys know how I feel if you've seen, I made a couple of videos about this where there's obviously more routes to success than college. In many cases, there's people that are going to college, getting degrees that maybe won't do much for them. There's people that get into trades, that people that get into jobs, work, all different kinds of stuff. That's besides the point. He was being productive with his time. So he had finished his bachelor's and he was planning to go to law school, which anyone in the right mind would look at that and be like, wow, this is someone who's going to be able to build a future for himself, support a family, do all that kind of stuff, be financially successful. And he was getting ready for the LSAT exam, which I know they have the bar exam, which is, I believe, after law school, you take that so you can actually be certified to be a lawyer. And then the LSAT is what you take before law school, essentially an entry exam, right? It's like a sort of a placement test. And he was studying for that. Now, in the meantime, when he was studying, he had actually traveled to Detroit, Michigan, with a friend of his who was actually dating a girl from Detroit. Keep in mind, we live here in Washington, the Pacific Northwest, so he was traveling a long distance. And while he was there, he actually had met a girl in a nightclub, which, of course, most of you guys probably listening will be like, that's, you don't need to tell me more than that. I mean, like I said before, the nightclubs, bars, those kind of stuff is not the kind of place you want to meet a woman. Dating apps, again, not the kind of place you want to meet a woman. It's like you're betting against the house with all the odds against you. But nonetheless, they connected. He was a little bit buzzed, whatever you want to call it. Nonchalant, just went up to her, complimented her. They connected, exchanged numbers and all that. But he was going back now to Washington from his trip. And she actually had him kind of in a loop where they were texting, all this kind of stuff, connecting on social media. And during that time that he was supposed to be studying for this LSAT exam, which he was studying very hard before getting to know her, he stopped studying. He would be in Detroit every now and then. Every 2 or 3 months, he'd go to Detroit for a number of weeks, number of months. And of course, I think she had come to Washington only once, but he went there at least 2 or 3 different times. And she had actually been very disrespectful. Came to find out that she was texting her friends, gossiping about him behind his back, saying how he's not a real man, saying how he doesn't have his own money, and that his parents are the ones supporting him and stuff like that. What I find so crazy about that, which I'll get into how he found out about the text, but I want to touch on this because it's an important point. I've seen a lot of women do this with this hypergamy stuff, where they want a man to have everything right now, or they're comparing themselves or comparing their man to some social media thing, facade, whatever you want to call it, some guy in a yacht or some guy with rented cars or some, whether they're rented or not, some guy that has it all figured out right then, right now. You'd think she should look at this guy who's, by the way, in his very early 20s, figuring his life out and being like, you know what? This is a man who's going to have his stuff together, who's going to be successful in the long run, who's going to have money if he's successful in being a lawyer. But she has more respect for the guy who has the Instagram clout or social media clout, the guy who has it all figured out or seemingly has it all figured out. It's crazy. I see women that'll have more respect for a guy who, again, is jobless, even in some cases, versus a guy who's respectable, lawyer, engineer, someone who has it figured out. I mean, like I said, it was a girl from a nightclub, so not the best pool of women to be dating in the first place, not the best pool of women in general that would ever be worth taking seriously. He was young and perhaps naive at the time. But the reason why he went through her phone is he had a gut feeling that she was doing things she shouldn't be doing, which of course that shows that there were red flags there. He wasn't ignoring the red flags, which is good. So when he was over in Detroit, while she was asleep, he went through her phone and then found these texts. Like I said, her texting her friends, saying all this kind of stuff about him, how he's not a real man, doesn't have his own money. Also came to find out she had in her notes a list of all these guys that she had slept with, all of their star signs or whatever those things are called, Leo, this and that. And it was at least 13 different dudes. This girl was in her very early 20s, which is crazy as it sounds. I've heard some people say those are rookie numbers. I know someone personally who I'm related to, the girl that he went to prom with in high school. Keep in mind, this was around 10 years ago. When, from what I've heard, I mean, some people said it's as bad. I mean, I've heard it's gotten worse in terms of the whole sleeping around stuff. But this girl was 17 and she had slept with more than 30 different people, more than 30 different dudes at the age of 17. I mean, that is disgusting. That's the only woman. That is absolutely disgusting. That is not a woman that I would ever be able to take seriously. But with this situation, he found out that she had been with a lot of different guys, had their names in her notes, and with the disrespect. Now, I credit my friend for this. A lot of you guys would maybe say, oh, he was this and met a girl at a nightclub. Again, like I said, he was a lot younger and naive at the time. But he had he had what it took to put the foot down and break up with her. And I commemorate him for that. Because there's a lot of men who, unfortunately, from what I've seen, whether it's desperation, whatever it might be, will let women get away with this kind of stuff. Let women get away with the red flags of, oh, I can fix her and this kind of stuff. It never ends up working out. So I completely, and I even told him straight up when we got on the phone. Because I remember he called me when he was in the airplane, and for some reason I had a gut feeling that something was up because he wasn't back from his trip. I knew when he was coming back. He called me while he was in the airplane. He told me what happened, said he broke up with her, told me the whole situation. I said, dude, look, I commemorate you for that, and it's good that the relationship did not last much longer than a number of months. So he comes back to Seattle. she's all emotional, trying to make things up with him. And again, I commemorate him for this too. He blocked her on social media so she could stop hitting him up and stuff like that. Also, so he could stop thinking about her. But where the story kind of takes a turn is that all the time that he was supposed to spend studying this LSAT exam, studying to get into law school, he was spending over in a long distance relationship with this girl in half the country away. So he ended up taking the LSAT and did not do well on it. Did not get into the law school that he wanted to get into. He was a very smart guy. He had phenomenal marks with his bachelor's degree. But he was so distracted and so derailed and lost focus on his mission and purpose that he did not get as good of a score as he ideally should have. He stopped studying. Like I said, he was gone for months at a time. So even with that, obviously there's more routes to success. There's options to take it again. There's options to get into other law schools, whatever it may be. But my point of the story is that there's so many times where women, especially toxic women like in this situation, will ruin and derail good men who are doing the right things, who should be focusing on what they need to focus on. I've seen it time and time again. I've known friends that have gone with women. They freeze their gym memberships. They stop hanging out with friends. They stop hanging out with family. They stop going to work even in some cases. And these are times where it backfires. I had another friend of mine with an ex of his who, he's someone I talk to this day. I could call him family, to be completely honest. There was a girl he was dating around a year and a half ago. Met her at a Starbucks, which, kudos there. It's a step up from a nightclub or a dating app. But met her at a Starbucks. And she had this male best friend that she was hanging out with, which he was, like any man for the most part, should not be okay with. If they're not, should not be okay with that. And he told her straight up. And she was saying that she's known him since 7th grade, all this kind of stuff. Turns out this guy was who she lost her virginity to in high school. And they were in some weird open relationship where he was sleeping with other people, other women, whoever. And she was able to be with other dudes, but they would talk every day. And again, what was such a red flag in the situation was that she would barely even make any time to spend with him. And it would only be on weird days like Tuesday, Thursday, never a Friday or a Saturday, because she'd be out partying, doing other stuff. She'd be out with other dudes. We came to find out down the line because a friend of ours actually went to high school with her and told us the kind of person she was. She said, she told my friend that she'd only been with 2 other dudes. That was a complete lie. It was apparently in the hundreds from what I've heard. Well above 100. It was disgusting what I heard about this girl. So, again, a situation where he wasted a lot of time on a girl who fed him lies. And the reason why we found out that she was up no good was actually because she would try to make it sound like she would be staying at her parents' the nights that she could not hang out with him. And my friend's a smart guy. He could be a detective, quite frankly, but he had a bad feeling about that. His gut was telling him something is up. So me and him went for a drive, and we actually saw her at a movie theater. It was the AMC. I can't remember which one it was, but it was an AMC. And we saw her get out of the car with like 2 other dudes and another girl at like 11 p.m. They were going to seeing a movie. The night that she said she was with her parents, that she couldn't hang out with my friend, who was her boyfriend at the time, apparently. It's absolutely insane. And guys, a real important point I want to make with even videos like this is why we need real brotherhood and camaraderie among men. Because when men are going through this, when I've seen so many men broken with divorce, with all different kinds of stuff, to have someone there as a brother who calls you, not because they want a favor, not because they need something, but just say, hey bro, like, I hope you're doing well. I want to see how you've been. We haven't talked in a while. Hope all's well with you. Like, I have friends who are going through right now in this moment, custody battles and stuff like that. And I check in on them because I know how hard it is. I'm not saying I know from experience. I know from seeing other people and countless people go through it. Like, even in this video, the 2 stories that I picked out, I could have picked several to go off of, several. And that shows you how common these kind of things are. That's why these kind of videos need to be made, because this kind of toxic behavior needs to be called out. It's men are getting their lives destroyed over toxic relationships with women. Their lives destroyed, thrown in financial ruin, being taken to clears. Do people not understand that? And the other thing people need to understand too is because you get all these weird, these kind of butting heads and stuff like that. In order for any sort of marriage or anything to work, it's never going to work with a toxic woman. It's never going to happen. People talk about all this stuff nowadays. If we have men, good men especially, like I've seen most good, decent men, getting with these toxic women, it is a complete waste of time. It is never going to work out. And like I said, it's so heartbreaking to see so many good men who have worked so hard to build themselves up, a lot of them who've come from nothing, to be completely derailed and destroyed by toxic women. It's never going to work, folks. And, you know, again, this is why it's so important also, why I've touched on in previous videos, men having purpose, sticking to their purpose, not easily getting derailed by stuff like this. Because, you know, and I hope by putting out videos like this and many other awesome channels, my friend Dev, all different kinds of people who makes content like this, that men who are younger and perhaps less experienced or more naive, whatever you want to call it, they can see that and know how to have the discernment, know the red flags to look out for, not make these mistakes. I don't want to see good men make these mistakes. I don't want to see good men in these kind of positions. And I've seen it way too many times. I could count at least with both hands how many people I know personally who have gone through toxic relationships, toxic ex, divorce, custody battles, being taken to the cleaners, financial ruin from divorce. It is far too common, and a lot of people don't seem to understand that. Even with men's problems and stuff like that, you have a lot of the times women want to come out and on videos like this even, they'll say, oh, well, what about our problems? What about women who feel... I understand there are women who perhaps go through things. I'm not taking that away, but understand something. In a man's space, when men want to talk about their problems, you have to give them their turn to talk. Because believe it or not, there are so many men, countless men, suffering in silence with stuff like this. It took me over the past few years, again, I guess I'm more of an age now where people have kids, get married, stuff like that, if they even do that still, where I wouldn't have thought 5-10 years ago that this was so common, but it's disturbingly common. And again, that's why this kind of stuff needs to be addressed and brought to the limelight. It really does have to be. You know, good men being beat down by toxic women and you know, society, whatever you want to call it. It's not a joke. It's not a joke, people, but as always, appreciate you for viewing the video, and I got a pop filter on the mic, so hopefully that won't be an issue now, guys. I got a few comments on that, so thank you, guys. Always a pleasure.
A shot, man.
As we head toward Philadelphia, I almost want to call her the answer. As an answer for everything.
A shot, man.
As we head toward Philadelphia,
through birthday cakes and pie. I've thrown my body in dumpsters. I've had the entire world
All right, so for this video, I am going to be talking about why I am skeptical of prayer and manifestation. I'm also going to go into why I think, parapsychology does a much better job of sort of proving the mind's connection to reality, because I think a lot of people misinterpret, my stance on these things. I think a lot of people think that, whenever I diss the law of attraction, whenever I diss like the way that manifestation's promoted in things like the New Age, or whenever I diss prayer, people think that I'm just dismissing like the mind's connection to reality. I definitely think that the mind has some sort of connection to reality. I definitely think that there is a power in the mind to affect changes in a so-called external reality. I'm not denying that, and I'm not denying paranormal phenomena. I'm not denying psychic phenomena like extrasensory perception. But I just kind of wanted to go into, why I'm skeptical of like the prayer and manifestation stuff. Now, the first thing that I want to say is that, manifestation and, like the people who believe, in manifestation and the law of attraction, and, the people who, believe in, doing thoughts and prayers to make the hurricane go away, a lot of them are cut from the same cloth, right? I think that, like the manifestation crowd and the thoughts and prayers crowd are very similar to one another, and they're cut from the same cloth. The manifestation people are essentially like the New Age version of the people saying, we got to send thoughts and prayers to to stop the hurricane. Like, they're very similar to one another. One of the reasons why this is that both groups rely on wishful thinking as their sort of modus operandi for trying to change their reality. But there are a lot of people that say like, oh, but it's not wishful thinking, there's you have to do XYZ, there's like a technique to it or whatever. But regardless of what you think the sort of actual like, oh, that's not true manifestation. True manifestation involves it. Okay, like whatever real manifestation technique you use or whatever, the way that it's promoted to the masses is wishful thinking. Even though there might be like a real version of it that not a lot of people talk about, the version of it that is promoted, like the version of prayer and the version of manifestation that is promoted to the masses, is a lot of wishful thinking as sort of like the main modus operandi for trying to change your sort of reality, right? And I think that like in my opinion, real manifestation or magic, for example, if you wanted to talk about this in magical sort of terms, I think that real magic doesn't require wishful thinking or faith. A lot of people talk about that word faith, where like if you pray and you don't get something, then people say that, oh, like you didn't have enough faith. And that's sort of like the primary thing that people focus on whenever they do like the whole thoughts and prayers thing, is like, oh, you need to have faith, you need to have wishful thinking. And that's basically what faith is. It's wishful thinking. It's denying reality, trying to ignore the problem to make it go away. It's blind faith without reason. Okay, and I think that is something that like if you look into stuff like remote viewing, if you look into stuff like mind over matter interaction with like random number generators, which I'll get into that later in the video. If you look at stuff like that, you don't need wishful thinking to see that stuff is real. So same thing with near-death experiences. Okay, like why do I believe in the existence of an afterlife is because of all these people who have near-death experiences. Okay, so you don't need to discard logic when it comes to this stuff. You can look at psychic abilities and like the existence of a spirit realm and things like that. You can look at that and still be logical and level-headed about it. You don't need to just blindly believe everything that people say, just because people say, oh, you need to have faith in order to manifest. You need to have faith in order to get what you want from prayer or whatever. Right, so I think that's another thing too, that I think real manifestation, real magic shouldn't have to require this this sort of gullible wishful thinking. A lot of times people have this sort of cop-out that they do where they say that, oh, your thoughts influence reality. They'll say thoughts influence your reality, but then they'll turn around and say, but oh, your thoughts influence your actions, and that's how your thoughts influence reality. To me, that is very disingenuous. Because, like, okay, obviously your thought patterns are going to influence your actions, okay? The things that you think on a regular basis are going to influence the physical actions that you take. I don't think anyone's arguing that, okay? I don't think anyone denies that that's a real thing. Like, controlling your inner monologue, controlling your thought patterns, obviously that's going to influence the actions that you take in the physical world. That really is sort of like a cop-out. Whenever people talk about your thoughts or your mind influencing reality, people often do that as sort of a cop-out. And I think that is very disingenuous. I hate it whenever people say, "Oh, thoughts influence reality," but then they say, "Oh, well, you see, your thoughts influence reality because it influences the stuff that you do." They're trying to make it sort of like a mystical thing, and it's like, okay, yeah, obviously your thoughts are going to influence the stuff that you do. Okay, if I think about hamburgers all the time, eventually I'm going to be tempted to buy a hamburger. I mean, I don't think that that's very esoteric. I don't think that that's very metaphysical necessarily. Whenever I talk about thoughts influencing reality, I'm not talking about like, oh, okay, like I'm coming up with a plan for how to make more money. I'm going to manifest money by applying for a job or something. Like that's not real manifestation, in my opinion. That you're just doing things. You're doing things and you're taking action to make things happen in the physical realm. Okay, like that's not manifestation. Okay, that's just doing things, and you're sort of applying manifestation lingo in order to feel esoteric. That's one of the things that I wanted to sort of point out, the sort of disingenuous sort of cop-outs that a lot of people do whenever it comes to manifestation. Is what they do is they do physical things to make stuff happen, and then they say that, oh, it was manifestation. Like, no, you did things in the physical world, and then there was a cause and effect relationship there. That really isn't esoteric, that you just did something and something happened. Another reason why I think that the people that promote manifestation and prayer are very sort of disingenuous and sort of intellectually dishonest is that both manifestation and prayer have a lot of like confirmation bias. A lot of like the people that promote manifestation and prayer, that they make it to the point where it's sort of unfalsifiable, to the point where if you try and pray for something, or if you try to manifest something, then a lot of times what people will do is that if you try to pray for something or manifest something and it works, then people will say that, oh, okay, that's proof that it works. But if you try to pray for something, or if you try to manifest something and it doesn't work out, then people say that, oh, okay, well, you did it wrong. There really is no way to test or to try to falsify prayer or manifestation, and that's sort of a proof of deception, because you don't need to make it to the point where it's unfalsifiable, or that you have no real way of falsifying it. If it's true, then if you try to disprove it, it'll end up being true regardless. Okay, but you have a lot of these people that say oh, okay, well, like if you pray for something and you didn't get it, then that means that you didn't have enough faith. And if you pray and if you did get something, that means that you did prayer correctly. Okay, if you try to manifest something and you didn't get anything out of it, then that means that you didn't manifest correctly. And if you try to manifest something and you did get something out of it, then that means that you manifested properly and that you did it correctly. It kind of pisses me off whenever people talk like that, because it's sort of disingenuous and it's very intellectually dishonest to make everything sort of unfalsifiable, to the point where, like there's no way of trying to like disprove it and it ends up being true anyway, which yet again, like manifestation and like real magic shouldn't require wishful thinking or just blind, gullible faith in order for it to work. This is the case for a lot of like parapsychology stuff, which is that there seems to be like an objectively true mechanism for how that stuff works, regardless of our skepticism. Another thing too that is sort of annoying when it comes to like the prayer and the manifestation people is that everyone claims to have, the proper method for how to manifest. There's a lot of like vague posting people. They enjoy like pretending to be esoteric, like they enjoy the feeling of like being smarter than everyone else, and so they have this sort of like, I have the secrets of manifestation, or here's the secret of prayer. Only I know the secret proper method for how to pray properly. Only I know the secret method for how to manifest properly. And like there's like 1,000 different people that sort of say like, oh, okay, this is the real way of doing it. This is the real way of doing it. Only I know the secret. And it's so annoying that you have so many sort of like vague posting, people that say like, oh, okay, like I have the secret esoteric knowledge. This is the proper way of manifesting it, but you can only get it by buying my $1,000 course. And like they're doing this sort of thing where they're sort of LARPing, and they say like, oh, okay, I'll teach you how to manifest properly. I'll teach you how to manifest properly, because most people, they don't have the secret. They don't have the secret to manifesting. Most people get it wrong, but I have the secret method, and it's like, okay, shut the fuck up, dude. That stuff is just very annoying and disingenuous to me. Another thing too about prayer and manifestation is that a lot of the people that try this type of stuff don't really see a lot of results, and I think that the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty, and the fact that there's a lot of speculation as to like what the proper sort of method is, or what the proper way of praying is, or what the proper way of manifesting is, I think that is pretty suspicious to me. The fact that there's a lot of speculation and debate as to like what the proper way of doing it is. And to me, that's sort of proof that like nobody actually knows what they're talking about. And like there's a lot of people that sort of pretend like they know what they're talking about. They pretend like they have like the secret esoteric information for how to manifest properly. But it doesn't seem like that anyone really knows what the exact mechanism is, which is very suspicious to me. And the last thing that I want to say about like the prayer and manifestation stuff, but before we get into the parapsychology stuff, is that I think that a lot of entities in the astral plane might use people's desperation to their advantage. I think that this applies more to the subject of prayer than it does to manifestation. But I think that like these entities, like if you're praying to your spirit guides, or if you're praying to God or whatever, I think that these entities can create false synchronicities. What these entities will do is that they'll sort of give you crumbs swept off the plate, and they'll give you a little synchronicity, or they'll give you like a small miracle so that they get you hooked, in order to get you to give away all of your power and all of your sovereignty to some external force. So basically what they're doing is they're sort of preying on people's desperation, which it's kind of interesting how like the word prayer sounds like a predator preying on an animal. Okay, that is kind of interesting how that there is a sort of like a similar etymology of like the word prayer and the word prayer, right? Preying on an animal, like a predator preying on something, that's smaller and weaker than itself in order to sort of subsist or to eat or to feed off of, right? But I definitely think that like if you pray to an entity and this entity creates a small synchronicity or a small miracle in your life, then I think that what these entities are trying to do is they're trying to get you hooked by giving away your sovereignty and authority to an external power, so that whenever you do die and whenever you do exit the body, you're more likely to obey that authority, whether it's God, whether it's Jesus, whether it's spirit guides, whether it's your guardian angel or whatever. I think that is one of the things that can happen, especially when it comes to prayer, especially when it comes to, praying to an outside force, is that these entities will create these sort of synchronicities in order to get you hooked onto their authority, so that you're more likely to reincarnate into the Loosh farm for another lifetime. But if we get into the subject of, parapsychology, I think that parapsychology is much better at, proving the existence of sort of the connection that the mind has to reality when it comes to things like, extrasensory perception or ESP, clairvoyance, like the mind over matter interaction. I think that parapsychology is much better at proving it because of the fact that parapsychology has experiments, it has data collection. Okay, parapsychology tests for the existence of psychic abilities instead of trying to make them unfalsifiable, which is something that like the prayer and the manifestation crowd, as I've mentioned earlier, they essentially try to make it an unfalsifiable thing that you can't really test. And if you try to manifest and it works, then that's good. But if it doesn't work, that means you just did it wrong. So it's not really a falsifiable thing. But parapsychology, what they're doing is they're running tests. They're trying to see if it is real or if it's not real in an experiment. And they're collecting data to see if it is like a real phenomena, across multiple people, across multiple test runs. One of the biggest examples or sort of proofs that psychic abilities are real is if you look at Project Stargate and the existence of remote viewing. Okay, like Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, what did they do? That they put a random location into a sealed envelope, they gave it to a person, and they said, oh, okay, go to this random location. And what did they do? They asked the remote viewer, who had no idea where this person went, right? Like, yet again, random location, sealed envelope, that person goes to a random location that the remote viewer doesn't know about, and the remote viewer describes that person's location with accuracy. Okay, that is a test. Okay, they're testing for the existence of that remote viewing capability, and people like Ingo Swann and people like Pat Price, Joe McMoneagle. Okay, and yet again, like they tested for it. They didn't just say, oh, you have to have faith, bro. You got to have faith that it exists or else it won't work. No, like these people had this ability to see without physical means into distant locations. Okay, and this is something that people like Russell Targ, one of the things that they'll say is that they'll say, like, I don't have to believe remote viewing is real. I know remote viewing is a real thing because there's so much evidence behind it. And there was this one documentary that I remember watching, years ago, called Third Eye Spies. And one of the things in that documentary that's pretty interesting is that like there are some skeptics that went into the Project Stargate program, and one of the things that happened was that like they sort of entered into the program as skeptics. They're like, oh, okay, like yeah, these remote viewers are full of shit. None of this is real, and they end up becoming converts in a way because they get enough evidence that remote viewing stuff is real. Okay, so you don't have to be just like this blind faith, wishful thinking, oh, you just got to have faith, you just got to not trust your mind. It's okay to have logic. Okay, you need both logic and intuition. There's a balance here. Okay, but you don't have to be this sort of like wishful thinking, gullible. You just got to have faith in order to acknowledge that these abilities are real. You can see that there's evidence with things like Project Stargate, and you also see other experiments. This is where we get into like mind over matter interaction. One of the best experiments that sort of demonstrates the existence of mind over matter interaction is what they do is they take a quantum random number generator that generates zeros and ones at random, and what they do for this experiment is that they tell somebody, and they tell the test subject to try to get the random number generator to generate one number more than the other. So for example, they might tell someone, oh, okay, try to get the random number generator to generate more ones than zeros. And what ends up happening? The random number generator generates more ones than zeros than chance would allow for. Okay, so yet again, this is another test. This is another experiment where they're not trying to make it like an unfalsifiable, you just gotta have faith, kind of scenario. They're putting it to the test, and they're seeing that there is some sort of mind over matter interaction here, that there is some sort of clairvoyance or extrasensory perception that exists in the human mind where they can see to distant locations. Okay, and that is what convinces me of the existence of psychic abilities. It's not just somebody wrote it in a book and I take it for their word, or it's not just like, oh, okay, like I believe it because I want to believe it. Like, no, like there's actual evidence that this stuff is real. There's actual evidence and, tests and experiments that, parapsychologists do to prove that there is something there in terms of like the mind's fundamental connection to, so-called external reality. You could even go into, like the widespread experiences that, people have, like premonition dreams. That's another thing that like a lot of people have. A lot of people have premonition dreams, and so it's logical to assume that, oh, okay, well, if there's this many people that dream about the future that ends up happening, then there might be something there. It's logical to assume that. Okay, so you don't have to have this blind faith to see that these abilities are real, to see that the mind has some power to influence external reality, and that's sort of the gist of what I'm trying to get at. When it comes to this video, is that you don't have to have this blind faith in order to see that this, paranormal stuff is real. And that is sort of, my problem with like the prayer and, manifestation law of attraction crowds, is like they promote that sort of blind faith, wishful thinking confirmation bias, which is, completely unnecessary in my opinion, which is why I think parapsychology is the superior research field. It's the superior discipline when it comes to trying to like manifest or whatever. And I know that like, the dictionary definition of the term manifestation and like the way that it's used by, charlatans and, people who are, wishful thinkers, I know that there's a difference between the two. Okay, I'm not denying the existence of like the dictionary definition of manifestation, but I am denying the way that people promote it and the way that people talk about it and go about it in a way that's sort of, not helpful to the majority of people. Right, and so I think it's much more helpful to say like, hey, look into parapsychology, look into, like the tests and the experiments that people do. You can look into that stuff and see that there's something there at least. You don't have to like fully believe necessarily, but you can see that there's something there, like that the power of the mind extends beyond what we've been told or what we've been allowed to believe. You even look at, stuff like psychosomatic, phenomena where, people have, extraordinary power over their bodies, whether it's through, extreme will or even like dream experiences where, people are able to change their physical bodies using the power of the mind. One of the biggest examples of this that I came across, early on, whenever I was going down this sort of rabbit hole years ago, was I came across this video by this girl who had, this severe stomach condition, and she was on like 8 different medications, and she was having like constant cramps and stomach pains. And one of the things that this girl did is that she went into a lucid dream, and she went into this, magical pool of healing water. And after that dream experience, she ended up not having to take the medications, since she had that dream. Okay, so that is another piece of evidence for the power of the mind to influence the body, to influence like that whole like mind over matter thing. Okay, and yet again, like that is a real experience that someone had that actually changed their life. And so I think that there is something there when it comes to like the power of mind over matter. I'm not denying the existence of mind over matter. I'm not denying the existence of mental influence, clairvoyance, things like that. But I think that there's a much better way of going about it. And I think that like in general, when it comes to like paranormal stuff, it's okay to be evidence-based when looking at this type of stuff. You even look at like for example, okay, why do I believe in the existence of an afterlife? I think that the most convincing piece of evidence for the existence of an afterlife are near-death experiences. Okay, that's why I think the afterlife is a real thing, because there's hundreds of people that report similar experiences with this other dimension, right? Their brain has stopped firing off electrical signals, their heart has stopped beating, their physical body is dead, and yet they have this experience of consciousness outside of the physical body. Whenever you have hundreds of people having a similar experience, that's a sign that there's something there. This is very similar to the widespread experience of premonition dreams, which convinces me of the existence of some level of clairvoyance in the general population, even though it might be weak or not that strongly expressed in the general population. There is something there in the human mind that is capable of doing that. And you can look at the evidence and you can make that rational deduction without having, blind, gullible faith. To sort of end this video, I kind of want to talk about some of like I guess you could say like further reading or further research that I highly recommend people do. I think that, first of all, that remote viewing documentary that I talked about is called Third Eye Spies. You can watch it on YouTube for free, I believe. But there's also a book that I highly recommend if you're interested in mind over matter interaction. There's this book by Jeffrey Mishlove called The PK Man. And what this book is all about is it's all about the author's correspondence with a man named Ted Owens, who, he claimed to be in contact with, gray aliens, and he was able to, manifest UFOs. He was able to control weather events. He was able to, create earthquakes and things of this nature. There's a lot of weird stuff in that book that's very interesting that was documented by Jeffrey Mishlove, in his correspondence with Ted Owens. If you want like a real evidence-based sort of account of like mind over matter, I think that this is one of the best books to read. It's one of my favorite books, to be honest. And also, if you wanted to, just generally research parapsychology, I highly recommend reading The Conscious Universe by Dean Radin. He goes into like a lot of the experiments that he conducted. He goes into a lot of like the data that he collected. Yet again, collecting data, doing experiments, doing tests. Okay, you don't have to have blind faith to see that this stuff is real. Those are some of like the further reading or some of like the further research stuff that I highly recommend if you're interested in parapsychology. But yeah, that's the video.
Good day.
Alright, so for this video, I am going to be doing a read-through of a section from Robert Monroe's book, Far Journeys, that talks about so sort of the origin of the term loosh and the origin of the idea of loosh harvesting. Anytime somebody talks about loosh, anytime somebody talks about, emotional energy harvesting, and they use that sort of term loosh, this is where it actually comes from. It actually comes from Robert Monroe's book, and it comes from this discovery that he had whenever he was out of body, and he discovered this about the Earth, right? About like sort of the purpose of the Earth and how the Earth is orchestrated as sort of a loosh farm, right? So I'm going to be doing a read through of this, and of course, as always with these read throughs, I'll be leaving a link in the description so that you can download this PDF for yourself if you want to. And another thing that I want to say is that, as I read through this, or as you read through this, if you download it and you decide to read it for yourself, I want you to notice how there does seem to be a lot of parallels between the story of the creation of the Loosh farm and the story of creation in the book of Genesis. There does seem to be a lot of parallels, at least that I've noticed whenever I was reading through this document, right? But yeah, let's get into it. Far Journeys, The Mystery of Loosh. In one of his many out-of-body travels, visionary researcher Robert Monroe came across the story of Loosh cultivating and harvesting, and was shocked to discover how humans and our emotional energies may fit into the cosmic food chain. Editor's note: Robert Monroe is regarded as a modern pioneer and explorer of the non-physical realms, using out-of-body or astral travel. His first book on the subject, Journeys Out of the Body, was published in 1971, and Monroe treated it in quite a methodical and almost geographical manner. Obviously, out-of-body travel and exploration is not new to mankind, but this was the first time in our modern era that somebody had taken the time and effort to document the realms of non-physical realities that surround our planet. As readers of his books already know, these realms are temporarily inhabited by all sorts of non-physical beings, including many who are in between lifetimes on Earth, some who visit while out of the body, and some who visit in the same manner as that of travelers on guided tours. Consider how we can enjoy a boat tour of the River Nile in Egypt, and disembark temporarily to view the wonders of ancient Egyptian temples and ruins. Each tourist has in their hands a travel brochure, which describes the highlights and history of each destination. The extract you are about to read is the travel brochure description given to various non-physical tourists who visit Earth while on their own cruise of curious sights of the Omniverse. This extract picks up after a discussion between Monroe and one of these non-physical tourists, named BB. This results in Monroe asking to be shown how Earth is described in their travel brochure. However, these non-physical brochures are not read. Instead, they are experienced or felt or witnessed. A couple of Monroe's terms in this extract need clarifying. Click means change consciousness, and ident signifies a mental name or address. Note that this extract on Earth's history and purpose only takes you to the point where conscious, sentient male and female humans come into existence. It does not describe the rise of civilizations or human history. Click. Someone, somewhere, or both, in millions or uncountable, requires, likes, needs, values, collects, drinks, eats, or uses as a drug a substance identified as Loosh. This is a rare substance in somewhere, and those who possess Loosh find it vital for whatever it is used for. Faced with this question of supply and demand, a universal law of somewhere, someone decided to produce it artificially, so to speak, rather than search for it in its natural form. He decided to build a garden and grow Loosh. In the natural state, Loosh was found to originate from a series of vibrational actions in the carbon-oxygen cycle, and the residue was Loosh in varying degrees of purity. It occurred only during such action, and secondarily during the reactive process. Prospectors from somewhere ranged far and wide in search of Loosh sources, and new discoveries were hailed with much enthusiasm and reward. The first and second crops. So it was that someone and his garden changed all this. Far off in a remote area, he set to work on his experiment. First, he created a proper environment for the carbon-oxygen cycle, where it would flourish. He created a balance with much care, so that proper radiation and other nourishment would be in continuous supply. He then tried his first crop, which actually did produce Loosh, but only in small quantities and of comparatively low grade, not significant enough to take back to the heart of somewhere. The problem was twofold. The life period was too short and the crop units themselves were too minute. This brought about limits in quality and quantity, as the crop had no time to generate Loosh in such close tolerances. Moreover, the Loosh could be harvested only at the moment of termination of the lifespan, not one moment before. His second crop was no better, if as good. He changed the environment to another part of the garden, where the density was gaseous rather than liquid, and the higher density chemicals formed a solid base and thus were still available. He planted numberless units in many varieties in a new form, with a great increase in size, some many thousands of times larger and more complex than the simple unicellular first crop. He reversed the carbon-oxygen cycle, yet all had a basic uniformity. Like the first crop, they would reseed at regular intervals and terminate their lifespans automatically. To avoid the uneven distribution of chemicals and radiation which had been prevalent in the first crop, he immobilized the second crop. Each was designed to stay principally in its own section of the garden. To this end, each was given firm tendrils which burrowed deep in the more dense chemical matter. Attached to this was a stem or trunk, which helped elevate the upper portion upward for its share of needed radiation. The upper portion, broad, thin, and somewhat fragile, was designed as a transducer of carbon-oxygen compounds to and from the crop unit. As an added thought, brilliant color radiators accompanied by small particle generators were mounted on each unit, usually near the top and symmetrically centered. He set up circulating patterns in the gaseous envelope around the crop, principally to aid in the reseeding process. Later, he discovered that the same turbulent effect served as a means of harvesting the loosh. If the turbulence were violent enough, the crop would be blown down, the lifespan terminated, and the loosh would discharge. This was especially useful when an immediate loosh supply was desired at a particular point rather than at harvest time. Despite all of this, the second crop was most unsatisfactory. While it was true that a much greater quantity was attained, the unrefined loosh produced was of such low grade that it was scarcely worth the effort. In addition, the growth period was now too long and no increase in quality resulted. Some vital element was missing. The third crop. Someone hovered over his garden for a long period in study before he attempted the third crop. It was indeed a challenge. True, he was partially successful. He had grown loosh, yet the product of his efforts fell far short of the wild, uncultivated variety. It was inevitable that he perceived the answer. The third crop was living proof of this truth. The original carbon-oxygen cycle must be included. Mobility must be restored. Both factors had shown great promise in high-grade loosh production. If size could be added to this, much could be accomplished. With this plan in the forefront, someone removed various sample units from the first crop, which was still thriving in the liquid portion of the garden. He modified them to exist and grow in the gaseous area. He adapted them first to take nourishment from the second crop, which he permitted to abound for this very purpose. Thus it was that the first of the mobiles, the third crop, came into being. The mobiles took nourishment from the second crop, thus ending its lifespan and producing low-grade loosh. When each huge mobile terminated its own lifespan, additional loosh was produced. The quantity was massive, but the frequency pattern of the loosh residue still left much to be desired. It was by accident that someone came upon the prime catalyst as regards loosh production. The monstrous and slow-moving mobiles had a lifespan far out of proportion to their nourishment input. The growth and life termination process was of such length that soon the mobiles would all but decimate the second crop. The entire garden would be out of balance, and there would be no loosh production whatsoever. Both the second and third crop faced extinction. As the second crop grew scarce, energy needs of the mobiles became acute. Often, two mobiles would seek to ingest the identical second crop unit. This created conflict, which resulted in physical struggle among two or more of the ungainly mobiles. Someone observed these struggles, at first bemused with the problem, then with great interest. As the struggles ensued, the mobiles were emanating loosh, not in fractional amounts, but in sizable, usable quantities, and of a much higher purity. He quickly put the theory to the test. He removed another unit of first crop from the liquid garden area. redesigned it for the gaseous environment, but with one significant change. The new mobile would be somewhat smaller but would require the ingestion of other mobiles for nourishment. This would solve the problem of overpopulation of mobiles, and at the same time would create good quantities of usable loosh during each conflict struggle, plus a bonus if the new class of mobile terminated the lifespan of the other. Someone would be able to transmit to somewhere practical amounts of reasonably pure loosh. Thus it was that the rule of the prime catalyst came into being. Conflict among carbon-oxygen cycle units brings forth consistent emanations of loosh. It was as simple as that. The fourth crop. Satisfied that he had found the formula, someone prepared the fourth crop. He knew now that the third crop mobiles were too large and too long in lifespan to be ultimately practical. If grown in large numbers, the entire garden would have to be expanded and enlarged. There was not space enough to grow such massive single units and the proportionate leafy second crops to support them. Also, he reasoned correctly that more rapid and increased mobility would expand the conflict factor with a resultant higher loosh output. In one single motion, someone terminated the lifespans of all the lumbering third crop mobiles. Going back to the first crop in the liquid area, he modified and expanded them into a multitude of shapes and sizes. He gave them complex multicellular structures of high mobility. He designed into them a pattern of balance. There were those that ingested a second crop type of carbon cycle unit, basically immobile, as an energy source. There were others very highly mobile that required for energy the ingestion of other mobile modified first crop units. The completed circuit operated quite satisfactorily. The stationary second crop modification in the liquid environment flourished. Small, highly active, liquid-breathing mobiles took nourishment. They ate the second crop modification. Larger and/or other active mobiles consumed for energy the smaller plant eaters. When any mobile grew too large and slow, it became an easy target for the smaller mobiles, which attacked in voracious numbers. The chemical residue from these ingestive actions settled to the bottom of the liquid medium, and so provided new nourishment for the stationaries, modified second crop, completing the circuit. The result was a steady flow of loosh, from the lifespan termination of the stationaries, from the intense conflict among mobiles to avoid ingestion, and finally from the sudden termination of the lifespans of such mobiles as the inevitable product of such conflicts. Turning to another portion of his garden, the gaseous area with a dense compound base, someone applied the same techniques with even more advanced improvements. He added many varieties of stationaries, original second crop, to provide sufficient and diverse nourishment for the new mobiles he was to create. As in the other garden area, he made such mobiles into a balance of two species, those that ingested and drew energy from the second crop stationaries, and those that required other mobiles for sustenance. He created them in literally thousands of original types, small, large, yet none so large as the third crop mobiles, and ingeniously gave each some appurtenance for conflict. These took the form of mass, elusive speed, deceptive and/or protective coding and color radiation, wave action and particle receptors and detectors, and unique high-density protuberances for gouging, grasping, and rending during conflict. All of the latter served neatly to add to and prolong the conflict periods, with the resultant increase in loosh emanation. The peace of someone. As a side experiment, someone designed and created one form of mobile that was weak and ineffective by the standards of the other mobiles in the fourth crop. Yet this experimental mobile had two distinct advantages. It had the ability to ingest and take energy from both the stationaries and other mobiles. Second, someone pulled forth a piece of himself, no other source of such substance being known or available, to act as an intensive ultimate trigger to mobility. Following the rule of attraction, someone knew that such infusion would create in this particular mobile species an unceasing mobility. Always it would seek to satisfy the attraction this tiny mote of himself engendered as it sought reunion with the infinite whole. Thus, the drive for satisfaction of energy requirements through ingestion would not be the only motivating force. More important, the needs and compulsions created by the piece of someone could not be satiated through the garden. Thus, the need for mobility would be ever present, and the conflict between this need and that of energy replacement would be constant, possibly a continuous high-order Loosh emanator if it survived. The fourth crop exceeded all of someone's expectations. It became apparent that a consistent, useful flow of Loosh was being produced in the garden. The balance of life operated perfectly, with the conflict factor producing immense amounts of Loosh, and a steady supplement brought into being by the constant lifespan terminations from all types of mobiles and stationaries. To handle the output, someone set up special collectors to aid in the harvest. He set up the channels to convey the raw Loosh from his garden to somewhere. No longer did somewhere depend principally upon the wild state as the principal source of Loosh. The garden of someone had ended that. With the success of the garden and the production of Loosh by cultivated means, others began to design and build their gardens. This was in accordance with the law of supply and demand. Vacuum is an unstable condition, as the amounts of Loosh from someone's garden only partially met the requirements of somewhere. Collectors on behalf of the others actually entered the garden of someone to take advantage of those small emanations of Loosh overlooked or ignored by the collectors of someone. Someone, his work completed, returned to somewhere and occupied himself with other matters. Loosh production stayed at a constant level under the supervision of the collectors. The only alterations were ordered by someone himself. Under instructions from someone, the collectors periodically harvested segments of the fourth crop. This was done to ensure adequate chemicals, radiation, and other nourishment from the younger oncoming units. A secondary purpose was to provide occasional extra amounts of Loosh created by such harvesting. To reap such harvest, the collectors generated storms of turbulence and turmoil in both the gaseous envelope and the more solid chemical formations that were the base of the garden itself. Such upheavals had the effect of terminating lifespans of multitudes of the fourth crop as they were crushed under the rolling base formation or smothered under waves from the agitated liquid area of the garden. By peculiarity of design, fourth crop units could not maintain their carbon-oxygen cycle surrounded by the liquid medium. The difference. The garden pattern of life might have gone on thus throughout eternity had it not been for the perception and inquisitiveness of someone. On occasion, he would study samples of Loosh from his garden. There was no motive in doing so other than the fact that someone may have held a remote continuing interest in his project. On a particular analysis of a Loosh sample, someone had casually examined the emanations and was about to return it to the reservoir when he became aware of a difference. It was very slight, but there it was. His interest centered immediately. He looked again. Woven delicately in with the more common Loosh emanations was a slender fragment of purified and distilled Loosh. This was an impossibility. Purified and distilled Loosh resulted only after the wild state Loosh had been processed many times. The Loosh from the garden of someone required the same treatment before it could be used. Yet here it was, so finely graded in its refined radiations that it could or would not return into compound with the raw substance. Someone reaffirmed his tests, and the result still was positive. There was a factor in his garden of which he was unaware. Quickly, someone left somewhere and returned to his garden. Outwardly, all seemed the same. The solid base gaseous areas of the garden were an endless carpet of green reflection from the thriving second crop. The modified first crop in the liquid area was in perfect accord with the action-reaction law, a division of cause and effect. Someone perceived without delay that the difference, the source of distilled loosh, lay neither with the first nor with the second crop. He found his first momentary touch of distilled loosh emanation in one of the units of the fourth crop, which by then had filtered through the plantings of the second crop. The flash came during the unusual action of this unit as it entered into a life-terminating struggle with another fourth crop unit. This alone would not create distilled loosh, someone knew, and he probed deeper for the source. It was at that moment that he discovered the difference. The fourth crop unit was not struggling in conflict over an ingestible remnant of a weaker fourth crop unit or a tasty frond from a nearby second crop stern, or to avoid termination of life and ingestion by other conflicting fourth crop units. It was in conflict to protect and save from life termination 3 of its own newly generated species, huddled under a large second crop unit waiting for the outcome. There was no doubt about it. This was the action that produced the flashes of distilled loosh. With this clue, someone examined the actions of other fourth crop units in the garden. He found similar flashes when other fourth crop units took the same actions in defense of their young. Still, there was an inconsistency. The sum of all such flashes of distilled loosh emanation from all such actions by the current fourth crop units would not amount to half of the total he had found in the sample from the reservoir. It was obvious that another factor was present. Systematically, he hovered over the garden, extending his perception to all areas. Almost immediately, he found the source. High-order distilled loosh radiation was originating from one particular section of the garden. Quickly, he hurried to the spot. There it was, an experimental modified fourth crop unit, one of those that contained a piece of himself in its functional pattern. It was standing alone under the leafy upper portion of a large second crop unit. It was not hungry. It was not in conflict with another fourth crop unit. It was not acting in defense of its young. Then why did it emanate distilled loosh in such great quantity? Someone moved closer. His perception entered into the modified fourth crop unit, and then he knew. The unit was lonely. It was this effect that produced distilled loosh. As someone drew back, he noted another unusual inconsistency. The modified fourth crop unit suddenly had become aware of his presence. It had collapsed and was jerking in strange convulsions on the solid base formation. Clear liquid was being expelled from the 2 radiation-perceiving orifices. With this, the distilled loosh emitted became even more pronounced. The formula. It was from this that someone propounded his now famous DLP, or distilled loosh production formula, which is in effect in the garden at this time. The balance of the story is well known. Someone included the fundamental in his formula. The creation of pure distilled loosh is brought forth in type 4M units by the action of unfulfillment, but only if such pattern is enacted at a vibratory level above the sensory bounds of the environment. The greater the intensity of said pattern, the greater the output of loosh distillate. To put the formula into effect, someone designed subtle changes in his garden, all of them familiar to every historian. The splitting of all crop units into halves to engender loneliness as they sought to reunite, and the encouragement of dominance of the Type 4M unit are but 2 of the most noteworthy limitations. As it appears now, the garden is a fascinating spectacle of efficiency. The collectors have long since become masters at the art of the DLP formula. Type 4M units dominate and have spread through the entire garden, with the exception of the deeper portions of the liquid medium. These are the principal producers of loosh distillate. From experience, the collectors have evolved an entire technology with complementary tools for the harvesting of loosh from the Type 4M units. The most common have been named love, friendship, family, greed, hate, pain, guilt, disease, pride, ambition, ownership, possession, sacrifice, and on a larger scale, nations, provincialism, wars, famine, religion, machines, freedom, industry, trade, to list a few. Loosh production is higher than ever before. The downside. Click. I was closed tightly, turned inward, stunned. My first reaction was, there had to be some mistake. This was not the story history of Earth. BB had it mixed up with some other port of call on their cruise schedule. Yet, as I ran the info again, the overlay of what little I knew of Earth's zoological and human history was uncomfortably accurate, albeit from another perspective. The food chain of Earth's ecobiologic system had been well established. Knowing this about Mother Nature, some of the hardcore philosophic speculators had often pondered where the human animal fitted in the process. The downside was, it was obvious who ate us. Before, it had been just that, speculation. Alright, so for this video, I am going to be talking about how population density relates to loosh production. I definitely think that, population density and trying to cram people into a single area contributes to the energy harvesting that happens in this realm. And the first thing that I want to talk about here, whenever it comes to like the whole subject of population density, is I think that there is this big push to sort of stigmatize or to make it difficult to travel. The nomadic lifestyle, or the ability to travel and to visit different places, is something that is made, it's either stigmatized if you're someone who wants to live like a nomadic lifestyle, or it's something that is seen as like a luxury item. It's seen as something that like you're not allowed to go and travel and visit different places unless boss man allows you to. And that is a huge part of like trying to keep people into one area, trying to keep people into one place. Is that there's always, like you're always tied to, your workplace, or to, some sort of, 30-year mortgage to some area where if you stop paying the mortgage, then, the bank comes and takes your house or whatever, right? So there is this sort of, push, or this sort of system that, tries to keep people into a single area, tries to sort of landlock people, right? This world is built around sort of like a stationary sort of lifestyle. And I don't think that that's an accident. I think that, it's easier to control people if people stay in a single place. People moving around makes it harder to track you, first of all, if you're somebody who moves around a lot. But if you're somebody who moves around, you're also more you're more difficult to monitor, you're more difficult to control. You're not bound necessarily by stuff that is put into a specific location, right? So I definitely think that there is this big push to sort of either stigmatize travel, or to make it very expensive and inaccessible, through the travel industry, or to make it seem like it's a luxury item, to try to keep people into one place as much as possible. That's the first sort of factor here that contributes to the whole population density thing. But the second thing that I want to talk about is, if you wanted to look at, high population areas like cities, for example, there is a huge push to try to cram as many people as possible into a single area, right? Trying to cram people into almost like a rat cage seems to be the sort of agenda. And this is why they want people to live in the pods. This is why they want people to, they want people to live in, the Hong Kong, coffin homes, and they want people to own nothing and be happy and to live in the pod. Is because that contributes to the ability to sort of cram as many people into these sort of dense population centers as possible, which I think that there are two reasons for this. The first reason is that, if you cram people into a single area, it makes it easier to sort of harvest or collect loosh, as opposed to, people being scattered all across the realm, right? I think if people are scattered versus if people are sort of concentrated into a single area, I think it makes it easier for loosh harvesting to occur if it happens in a single area, right? And that's a point that I'll get to later on. But the second reason for this is that the more people you cram into one place, the more likely there is to be negative emotion. I think that, if you cram people too close together, like the more people you're forced to interact with on a daily basis, the more likely it is that you're going to encounter conflict, you're going to encounter negative emotion. And, in general, people who live in, high population density areas, tend to be a lot less happy than people who live in the middle of nowhere and have their own sort of private space. that they can sort of exist in. Right. So I think that those are the two main reasons. Like, first of all, if you cram people into one place, it makes it easier to harvest the loosh. And, secondly, it makes it easier to, generate negative emotional energy if you force people to sort of interact with each other as sort of like a necessity. Right. But and I definitely think that, that interaction, it's not just physical interaction. It's also the interaction between people's sort of auras or people's sort of, emotional energy fields, where if you're surrounded by people who are sad, you can sort of pick up on that energy in your energy field, right? If you're next to, somebody who is sad, that can be sort of picked up by your energy field. And now that person's emotion is now part of your emotional state. That sort of coherence, principle definitely applies to, major cities where, people, so sort of feel the emotions of the people around them, whether or not they know it. The emotions that other people have affects your energy field. And this is where we get into, things like stadiums and, concerts and, churches, for example. These are all, events or places that are specifically designed for loosh harvesting. And the reason why I say this is, number one, if you wanted to talk about, like a sports game, let's use a sports game as an example here. Number one, you're forcing a high amount of people into a single place. But secondly, one of the things about like a sports game or something like a concert is that you're making people, not only are you making a large amount of people feel an intense emotion, but you're also making a large amount of people experience a single kind of emotion. This is why, if you've ever been in this experience where you're around a large amount of people in like a church or in a concert or in like a party or something, you'll notice that you'll get goosebumps whenever people are like cheering or whatever. And it's not just the physical noise. It's not just, people, making a loud noise when someone's about to score a goal. It's more like the emotional energy, like the sort of field of energy that is around these people is sort of affecting your energy field. And this is why you're experiencing like the sort of goosebumps and things like that. Right. And I think that, getting a large amount of people to experience the same emotion, I think that is something that is important for loosh harvesting, because of the fact that if you look at something like frequency, if you look at like how waves operate, whenever you have waves that are of the same frequency, that they add to each other. If you have two waves, whether it's light waves, whether it's sound waves, whether it's electromagnetic waves, whenever you have two waves that are of the same frequency, they add to each other to create like a higher amplitude, wave. Okay, and this is one of the ways that like lasers work, for example. Laser is an acronym for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Okay, so lasers, they stimulate the emission of radiation from, I believe it's like a crystal. The reason why the laser acronym contains light amplification is that you have these photons that are generated by the laser that are of the same frequencies. So that what happens is that these photons add to each other to create a more powerful light beam. And it's my belief that this same, amplification principle happens in, sports games. It happens in church sermons. It happens in concerts, like music concerts and all this like celebrity worship stuff, which I'll get into. The ability to sort of stimulate, not only just to stimulate a large amount of people to, to feel a high sort of spike in their emotional energy, but to get a large amount of people to experience the same emotion. I think that contributes to not only generating a large amount of loosh, but also generating a loosh that is of a high purity, because it's not like there's like 1,000 different people experiencing all different emotions. They're all experiencing and concentrating on, like the same game or the same celebrity or the same concert sort of performance or whatever. And so I think that these sort of, events or these sort of venues, for these events are definitely things that, in my opinion, are designed to harvest loosh, because of the fact that there's that population density factor and the fact that you're stimulating the emotion of people on a mass scale in order to generate that sort of purified loosh where like everyone's emotional energy sort of add to each other, almost like a laser. The thing about celebrity worship that is sort of interesting to me, it's sort of related to like the concerts and all this other stuff where you have like all these musical celebrities like Michael Jackson, for example. Like, this is one of the things that is sort of insane to me about celebrity worship, is like there's no way that you should be fainting over some guy in a thong. Okay, like, and you can think whatever you want about Michael Jackson, but like that level of celebrity worship, in my opinion, is just absolutely ridiculous. there is a loosh harvesting element there, especially when, yet again, you're cramming a large amount of people into a single area and they're all concentrating on a single person. I definitely think that, you know, loosh harvesting definitely contributes to like the amount of power that these sort of, you know, figures have. And it's not just celebrity worship. There's also politician worship with like all these rallies with all these like different political figures, right? But there's like all these rallies with all these different political figures, and they're all worshiping and so sort of giving their emotional energy to someone whenever they're giving a speech or whatever. It's the same kind of energy as with the concerts. It's the same kind of energy with like sports celebrities, like they shot the pig skin into the fork or whatever, into like that fork shaped, you know, thing or whatever, and now everyone's, you know, everyone's cheering and everyone's crying and all this other stuff like that. That is definitely something that, you know, is also an element of loosh harvesting. Is you have these people who, you know, are in high positions of power, they have a high amount of influence, and so they can get people to sort of congregate into one place in order to sort of harvest and sort of feed off of their loosh. That is one of the things that happens, that you know, these celebrities or these politicians or, you know, like all of these, you know, famous people, they definitely use you know, like the population density and like the loosh that is produced from the crowd to their advantage. And I think it happens whether they know it or not. Because, you know, like an energy exchange is an energy exchange, whether the person knows it or not. You have a large amount of people sort of giving off their energy to one person. There is a sort of energy sort of exchange that happens there regardless, right? Population density and, you know, trying to cram people into one place and trying to get people to feel a similar emotion while they're crammed into one place. I think that this is one of the things that streamlines the collection of loosh. And it also purifies the loosh that is produced as well. Because of the fact that if you have a large amount of people feeling the same emotion, then they're going to sort of generate this coherence where they're going to generate that sort of laser beam of emotional energy that is collected and harvested in order to run this sort of, you know, realm, right? And another thing that I want to say as well is that not every high population area is, you know, a place of loosh harvesting. I definitely think that there are places like hospitals, for example, where, you know, it's something that is sort of almost like a byproduct of like the purpose of a hospital. Like you have a high amount of people who are experiencing like physical ailments, for example, right? I think that hospitals are like, they're places of physical suffering, right? And so what happens is that if you cram a large amount of people into a single building that are experiencing physical ailments or physical suffering, that also produces, you know, a high sort of grade of loosh, because you have like all of these people experiencing, you know, negative emotional energy from whatever illness that they have, and it's concentrated into the singular area as well, right? So I think that there are places like hospitals and also maybe even like cemeteries whenever there's funerals and there's like a high amount of people that congregate in order to mourn a loss of a person. If you wanted to sort of look for like the way that the loosh farm works, population density contributes to the way that loosh is harvested and collected in this realm. All right, another thing that I wanted to add before ending the video is I wanted to talk about the subject of geomancy. And if you don't know what geomancy is, it's basically the use of earthen structures as like a form of magic, basically. These major cities and these major population centers use geomancy, and they use these sort of macroscopic you know, structures, these sort of large scale, you know, structures that you can see. And like one of the examples of like geomancy is you look at like the upside down pentagram and like the square and compass in Washington DC that you can only see from like an aerial view. That is one of the biggest examples of geomancy. And I think that geomancy is involved in the harvesting and the collection of loosh, and because of the fact that I think that, you know, shapes can definitely affect the how energy behaves. Like physical structures and, you know, shapes can affect how energy behaves and where energy moves. These structures are used also in, you know, large population centers in order to aid in the harvesting and in the collection of loosh, right? And I also think that, you know, the world energy grid and ley lines are also something that is a factor whenever it comes to placing certain areas, you know, around the world, right? But that is just something that's just something that I wanted to mention as sort of like an added note to like the population density. Is I think that geomancy is used as a way to sort of aid in the collection of loosh in this realm, right? But yeah, that's the video.